There is a place in the Canadian wilderness where time does not move forward. It circles slowly, like smoke over still water. It lies in the southwestern corner of the Northwest Territories, hidden in a labyrinth of canyons and boiling springs beneath a canopy of cloud and stone. Here, the South Nahanni River carves its way through the Mackenzie Mountains, a twisting artery filled with steam and silence. The locals call the region Nahanni, the river of the people who left, a name whispered with more memory than explanation. In this valley, birds fly high over certain reaches, refusing to descend below the ridgelines. Winds shift without cause. The sun, when it shines, feels filtered, not in warmth, but in clarity, as though the land decides how much light it will allow. And when people vanish here, which happens more than anywhere else in Canada, there are rarely questions left unanswered. Because there are no answers left at all. The Nahanni Valley first entered written history when fur trappers moved north through Dene territory in the late 1800s. They found rivers warm in winter, hot springs steaming through snowbanks, and ravines so wide and sheer they rang like bells when shouted into. The Dene people, who had lived in the area for thousands of years, did not offer to guide them far upriver. Many just shook their heads. "This part is not ours," one elder reportedly told a white trader. The Naha walked there, and they did not come back. The Naha, referred to in some oral traditions as a mountain-dwelling people, tall and silent, are the valley's oldest ghosts. Some say they once lived above the high canyons, descending only when the moon was thin to gather root medicines and commune with spirits. Others say they never lived at all, but were the land dreaming of people, formed of fog and shale, and gone the moment you try to name them. You won't find many stories of the Naha written down. Most Dene elders simply stare off when asked, "I settling where the sky meets rock." A few will mutter a soft word, "Winity," meaning it is left alone. When they speak of the valley, they don't describe monsters. Instead, they describe patterns. People who walk in circles before vanishing, cairns that move without touch, and fog that settles where memory should be. For many generations, the Dene avoided the deep canyons of the South Nahanni. Families would fish the lower reaches in warm seasons, but no one wintered past the first waterfall. Headless Valley, one of the first wide shelves after the river enters the deeper range, was considered the invisible border. Beyond it, animals grew too quiet. Fires burned uneven. Snow left no tracks. But then, gold fever reached north. By 1898, thousands of prospectors had stormed the Yukon, clawing at frozen riverbeds, scraping dust from rock. When the Klondike boom began to fade, rumors of an untouched strike, not far from the Mackenzies, started to swirl. It said a prospector named Maple Ridge stumbled into Fort Simpson, half-starved yet glowing. He claimed to have followed the Nahanni upriver until he reached a great granite wall where the cliffs rose like gravestones. Beneath it, he said, he'd found gold, soaked into the earth like honey and bark. He left weeks later with 3 others to return to the site. They were never seen again. Still, the story lingered. Still, treasure whispered behind every shadowed bend. Still, men packed their bags. By 1906, 2 brothers, Willie and Frank McLeod, decided to find their own path upriver. Frank, the older, was methodical, quiet. Willie, some said, had always been half in the clouds. They outfitted their boat with tools, dried meat, flour, a rifle, and a prospector's holy book, a worn mining pamphlet detailing how to test river silt for gold. They told friends they'd be gone 1 season, maybe 2. Frank wrote in a final letter, "We'll send word once we strike. Don't follow too early. The valley is strange." That was the last anyone heard from them. No news came for weeks, then months. By 1908, a nearby trapper convinced a party to head upstream. They found nothing. The banks were icy and calm. Wildlife kept to the edges. In First Canyon, they thought they heard someone call, but the wind collapsed the voice before meaning settled. Eventually, in a crooked bend past Headless Valley, they found what they were not looking for: a small, weather-worn tent. Ashes gray in a circle. A pot, frozen mid-clean beside still, black water. Then, 20 yards from camp, they found the brothers. Or rather, their remains. 2 bodies, curled as if in sleep. Flesh darkened by exposure. broken only by a single detail impossible to write off. Neither man had a head. Much has been written since. Some speculate animal attack. Others mention hypothermia. But those who saw the bodies first disagreed. One Metis guide, unnamed in the records, reportedly muttered to the trapper who found them, "Wolf don't move heads. Wolf don't carry things uphill." Because the tent, the supplies, even their gold pan had been placed tidily, almost too neatly, before the men died. The map found on Frank's body showed one marked point circled again and again. A granite shelf, unnamed. Its coordinates have never led to the same location twice. The official report from the Royal Northwest Mounted Police concluded death by unknown causes in severe weather. But the locals gave the area a name that would stick: Headless Valley. Still today, hikers who pass that bend say the silence there feels too structured. Not empty, just waiting. The fog sits low, hugging the banks until noon. The birds that pass through never land. Pines there seem slightly taller, as though seen from too far away. And at the center rise two stone cairns placed by the river, flattened over time by wind and suspicion. One to mark the men, and one, perhaps, for whatever took them. They say when you pass those stones, you feel a sound more than hear it. Low, measured, and rhythmic. 1, 2, 3. Not a threat. A count. The MacLeod brothers were not the first to vanish. And they would not be the last. Because something in the Nahanni doesn't speak. It waits. And when the silence gets heavy, the counting begins again. By the time the MacLeod brothers drifted into the Nahanni in 1906, the gold rush had already begun to fade. But what it left behind was hungrier than gold. It was something quieter, a need, hidden beneath the skin of men who hadn't yet given up on striking it rich. When gold couldn't be found easily, they chased stories. And in trapper cabins and makeshift saloons, one story kept circling back. There's a ledge up the Nahanni, where gold lies in veins thick as rope. No map confirmed it. No witness ever returned with proof. But that's how the good stories always work. They end before they can be proven false. Frank and Willie MacLeod were nothing if not believers. Born and raised in Nova Scotia, they were stubborn, proud, and already hardened by years tracking the bush. And when word reached them of a secret shaft beyond Glacier Lake, they didn't hesitate. No formal goodbye, no fanfare, just a note to a friend in Fort Simpson, heading upriver. Plan to reach the shelf near the cliffs by end of month. We'll send word once it's secure. Don't wait if it turns cold. The valley is strange. That word never came. They traveled lightly for a long journey. A single birch bark canoe, 2 rifles, and enough dry foods to ration across weeks. Most directions came from a hand-drawn trail map inherited from a Quebec prospector who claimed to have seen the glint of gold just past the third canyon. No one knew what became of that man. His walking stick was found propped against a cedar root a year after his boast, cleaned and bone-white. Still, the brothers pressed into the heart of the valley, up the Nahanni, into shadow-drowned cliffs that narrowed with every bend. The river carved through stone like language too old to remember. By mid-August, they passed the mouth of Deadman Valley. The trees grew stranger there, tilting against the slope, roots exposed. Pine needles fell too quickly. On a ridge above the waterline, they saw their first cairn. 3 stones, stacked deliberately, with a 4th stone left on the ground beside them. They didn't touch it. Later that month, according to a man in Fort Liard, someone claiming to have seen them paddling east said their eyes were red-rimmed, their skin pale. They looked, he said, like men who were waiting to wake up. That was the last known encounter with Frank and Willie MacLeod. The search party didn't organize until 1908, over 18 months since the brothers vanished. The trail had gone dead. But something about the silence unsettled the trappers who had known the MacLeods. These were men who'd survived avalanches, wolf packs, river caps, and yet it wasn't a report that got them moving. It was a dream. A friend of Frank's had woken one midwinter with frost in his beard, though he'd slept indoors. He said he could hear the river inside his bones. That was all. He gathered 3 others. The next thaw, they set off up the Nahanni, following what little trace remained. It took nearly 10 days to reach the MacLeod's intended range. They passed canyons so sheer the echo of their paddle dipped back twice for each stroke. The wind didn't move against them, only around them, like something shaping its path, avoiding contact. In a quiet wrinkle of land beneath low stone walls, they found the remains of the McLeod camp. A canvas tent pressed flat against earth, rust on the flap hooks. A bag of flour clumped with moisture left untouched. 2 gold pans, one bent. And beside a rock near the creek, a tin kettle still blackened from use. No signs of attack. No overturned crates. No blood. Yet 20 paces inland, past a clearing of brush that had grown over almost carefully, like a wound scarred by moss, they found the brothers. Their bodies were mostly intact and frozen in a posture that suggested collapse, not struggle. Their arms rested at their sides. Their boots were still on. One wore a ring, a family crest from Nova Scotia that confirmed their identity. But their heads, removed, cleanly, gone. There were no drag marks, no blood around the neck, only the faded evidence of once warmed skin separating from cold like damp cloth pulled from bone. No predator trails, no claw marks, no indication of violence, just something missing. The RCMP who eventually oversaw the report labeled the cause of death as exposure following unknown trauma. But to the guide who recorded it first in a quiet logbook, he wrote something simpler beneath the dry facts. They were taken by the land. The valley accepted them on its terms, not theirs. According to later retellings, the party lit no fire that night. Back in Fort Simpson, the story lasted even after the bodies were returned, unceremoniously, in 2 crates too large for their contents. Rumors spun like the river mist, that the heads had never existed, that it was a warning, that gold had been traded for silence. But the most common belief was this: the valley had made a count, 1, 2, and had begun keeping score. Not long after, a northern trading post began charting the disappearances. They kept a chalkboard nailed to the wall. The names were mostly initials, dates, coordinates. A few never had names, just a word, gone. Before long, that chalkboard was full. They hung a new one. Years later, a government geologist who inherited early Nahanni census records made an observation that still sits in footnotes, rarely discussed. Between 1904 and 1945, at least 7 expeditions entered the Nahanni with the intent to explore or claim mineral rights. Of those 7, 3 never returned. 2 returned without 1 or more members. 1 reported no sightings or disappears, but the team lead resigned the following year and refused to speak again of northern travel. And only 1 expedition came out whole. They spent no more than 6 hours inside the valley. The McLeod brothers were buried facing away from the range. Their dug graves sat in a low clearing, and the earth was salted, an old precaution. A cairn marked their site, a simple stack of stone with 1 slab left off to the side. Some say that slab was meant for their skulls, should they ever be found. They never were. And in the decades that followed, other cairns began to appear. On ledges, beside hot springs, on paths that didn't exist the day before, always in sets. 3, then a 4th, unassembled, waiting. Some disappearances come loud, but in the Nahanni, the scariest ones come quiet. Camp still warm, bedroll folded, fire smoldering low, and nowhere to walk, but into fog. When Albert File first heard of the McLeod brothers, he was already past 60. He hadn't come to the north for fortune. He'd come for distance. A war veteran, a trapper, and a man too weathered to explain himself. File was known for his silence and his stubborn devotion to impossible things. He had bones healed wrong, a spine shaped like a question mark, and eyes that were always looking uphill. But somewhere between the stories and his own instincts, he decided to follow the South Nahanni River. Not to find gold, to understand why the land kept secrets so well. File's first trip into the valley was difficult, but uneventful. He was alone. His boat was hand-built. His rations were dry bread, porridge flakes, and creeks full of glacier water. He moved slowly, sleeping light. He reached Deadman Valley and paused there, not to rest, to listen. In his journals, published later by a researcher who became fascinated with him, File described the first valley in simple, careful language: pines steep, growing sideways. Wind silent by midday. No crows. Heard movement at waterline last night. Nothing there this morning. Possible marmot. Left offering of salt. Offering. He never clarified what that word meant to him. By most accounts, File was not a religious man. But like many who've spent time in places other people avoid, He understood awe, the kind that doesn't require belief, only obedience. In 1927, he returned for a second journey. He said he felt the land had asked. This time, he packed fewer supplies, fewer maps. He brought two things others might not have: a handmade cairn to mark time, 5 flat stones wrapped in hide cord, and a small book of Dene prayers, phoneticized using his own system. He'd picked them up over years of shared fires with distant elders, never asking, just listening. Though none confirmed it, some said the old Dene recognized File as someone the valley might not take quickly, someone who had already lost enough. That second journey was different. He crossed Headless Creek and began climbing a narrow scree path, not listed on standard maps. The ascent took most of a day. At the summit, he built his cairn atop a bare hill. 5 stones, set in a spiral, one for each day he planned to stay. In his field notes, cold wind from nowhere, low tone and spruce last night. Couldn't place direction, not animal, not mine. Recorded 4 steps at perimeter, but mine were only 3 tonight. Checked again, same result. This is the first and only mention of footprints he did not make. But he kept going. File didn't claim to find gold. What he did find was something else, though he never wrote it plainly. He began describing the land differently, like it was something breathing. Trees standing wrong. Valley echo dragging. My voice comes back slower. Repeated sound near cairn, like counting. Slow. Not mine. That word again. Counting. One night, during heavy overcast, File reported being woken at exactly 3:01 a.m. Not by sound, by stillness. No wind, no fire crackle. Even the river, always moving, seemed to have stopped. He stepped out of his tent and walked to the cairn. For stones remained in the spiral. One had been moved to the center. He packed his bags that morning. The following day, after a fast journey out and a ferry ride back to Fort Simpson, he collapsed in a bunkhouse bed and slept for 16 hours. When he woke, he whispered only one thing to the innkeeper's wife before falling asleep again. Don't stay there longer than 5 days. It starts learning your name. File would return to the Nahanni again. Not once, not twice, 6 more times. Each trip slower than the last. Each time he went in alone. He rarely answered questions directly. When someone joked that maybe he'd caught the bad luck from the Headless Valley, he offered no laugh. Only 2 words: luck listens. He died in 1973, not in the Nahanni but near it, in a cabin overlooking a tributary of the river he always called Not Mine. Among his few possessions was a final map, drawn in soft charcoal lines. It showed a familiar ridge near Second Canyon, but with the river coiled not as a path, but a spiral. The map had no labels, only marks. 1, 2, 3. Albert File is remembered today as one of the first serious explorers of the region, featured in a short government documentary and a handful of books. But tucked behind the headlines and awards, there remains a question his writings posed indirectly again and again. Was he mapping land trails? Or counting how long he had left before the land remembered him fully? File once wrote that some places don't demand respect. They just stop showing you the way forward if you don't give it. His cairn still stands. You'd have to know where to look. It rises on a soft ridge dwarfed by granite cliffs, where even moss hesitates to grow. The spiral is still there, though now moss-caked and low. 5 stones. The center one stained a shade darker than the others. Wet, even in dry weather. Some say it marks a trailhead. Others say it marks a place the valley won't take again, because it already made its offering. And though File came back many times, the parts of him that returned grew quieter. He spoke less, slept deeper, drifted in conversation, unless someone mentioned the valley. Then his eyes would sharpen, just for a moment, like something within was still listening beyond the edge of that conversation. Maybe it still is. File didn't need to prove anything. Not gold. Not death. He didn't need to solve the Headless mystery. Instead, he gave it space. He left it intact. And because of that, he may have seen more of the Nahanni than anyone before or since. He once wrote, "It's not what's there that gets you. It's what you don't realize you've left behind." But File wasn't the last to hear the counting. And not all who entered the valley went in quietly or with reverence. In time, the Nahanni drew different seekers. Men with clipboards, maps, measuring tools. They didn't believe in stories until the stories started measuring them back. The Nahanni has never screamed. It doesn't crash through trees or leave claw marks on bark. It unfolds patiently, like cold water filling a boot. Quiet, measured, predictable, if you know the pattern. The trappers were the first to notice it, even if they didn't say it outright. A trapline that vanished. A fire circle moved to the left when they swore they built it on the right. A camp they remembered building, but not breaking. Nothing violent. No immediate threat. Just small warnings. And always three. The locals began to call it the rule of three. Everything, they said, came in threes. 3 signs before someone disappeared. 3 days before a storm without clouds. 3 stones stacked wrong. If something bad was going to happen in the Nahanni, it always started slowly, and it always started with 3. The first disappearance, as the records mark it, was the MacLeod brothers. The second, Martin Jorgensen, came just over a decade later. In 1917, Jorgensen, a Danish prospector, sent a final letter from the edge of the flat river claiming he had found something beyond ordinary reach. His words were careful, but confident. Strange stones. Sudden warmth in earth. May have stumbled on rich ground. We'll build shelter. 8 months passed. He was found long after the snowmelt, buried beneath the collapsed beams of a burned cabin. His satchel was intact, food undisturbed, and his tools stacked neatly by the hearth. But he, too, had lost his head. No bite marks. No splatter. Just absence. Some swore this missing detail made it less likely to be animals, more likely something worse. The RCMP gave an ambiguous report. Fire probable. Cranial remains not located at site. His name was added to the chalkboard in Fort Liard. Underneath, someone had drawn one small spiral. The third in the triplet came in 1945. A seasoned trapper named Bill Epstein vanished in mid-season. Unusual timing for any man working the lines. His last reported stop was near Brentnell Creek. Rangers found his camp weeks later. Fire ring cold. Axes laid out. Meat cured and packed, as if ready to move. Everything, again, in perfect order. Except there was no sign of Epstein. Not his clothes. Not his footprints. Not his sled or furs. They found only one thing out of place. 3 black threads tied to a spruce branch near the fire. Different lengths. Worn to strands. As if counted. One ranger later admitted, off the record, that he'd felt watched while in that camp. Not stalked, he said. Just observed, like you'd watch something fall to see where it lands. Some scoffed. They blamed wolves. The weather. Madness. But the guides, Dene and Metis alike, had no doubts. The pattern was known long before the prospectors arrived. First, the loud birds go quiet. Second, the fog settles early or comes uphill. Third, you hear something that isn't there. Sometimes a whisper, sometimes a low hum. Ignore that third sign, and the valley starts counting. After 3, one elder murmured, "You don't belong to your body anymore. Your path folds back, and nothing can follow." The RCMP compiled files. Quietly, by the early 1960s, they had dozens of unexplained cases. Nearly all the disappearances followed the same shape. One person alone or a pair, traveling off the established paths. All went silent after the third notable sign. Most of those cases were dismissed as natural loss. Missing, unrecovered, sunk in river current, lost to avalanche. No sustained investigation. No follow-up teams. Just silence, stacked upon silence. And stones. Always stones. Deadman Valley lives up to its name not because it's home to violence, but because so many air bladders from drowned bodies surface there. Men dropped far upriver, whose remains wash into the center. But those found there almost never match their last known location. Like something, or someone, changes the current. One unusual entry stands out in a ranger's logbook from 1957. No wildlife sounds past Cranberry Point. First night, breeze heavy with ash. Second, spirits asleep, air hollow. Third, saw cairn differently built. Not ours. Didn't touch it. Headed downriver by torch. She didn't file another trip into that section for the rest of her career. Some say the warnings aren't just signs of danger, they're invitations. If you notice them, really see them, maybe the valley chooses not to act. But if you dismiss them, if you say, it's weather, or it's sleep deprivation, or worse, I don't believe in this, that's when the stones start rearranging. Those who survive speak of the way things quiet themselves, not disappear, but muffle. One trapper, after returning from a solo trip cut short, described it best. It wasn't that I got scared or saw anything move. I just realized everything was just a little too still. Like a room after a clock stops ticking. That kind of still. And that's the thing most stories from the Nahanni have in common. The valley is not aggressive. It doesn't chase. There is no beast in the darkness. But it listens. It watches how you behave with silence. And when it finds someone making noise in all the wrong ways, it begins its own ritual of 3. You may not notice the pattern the first time. A cairn out of place. An echo with no call. A sound like counting run low through the river rocks, barely heard under your own breath. Most say it starts softly. 1. The third night, or the third turn in the trail. 2. A misplaced tool. A strange smell and clean air. 3. The quiet that isn't quite right. It's not until you've ignored them all that you realize you've wandered off the map, not in distance, but in meaning. Where paths loop, where sound doesn't reach past stone, where even if you scream, the canyon returns your voice with one word: gone. Warnings always come before the valley takes someone. But in the 1960s, a new kind of visitor arrived. Men who wrote nothing down except numbers, measurements, data, coordinates. Men raised in a world full of answers. And the Nahanni Valley showed them what it meant to measure something that cannot be named. In the spring of 1962, the Department of Northern Affairs commissioned a geological mapping expedition into the Nahanni region. Part of a broader push to assess mineral potential in Canada's northern interior, the mission was seen, on paper, as low risk, high value. But the Nahanni is a place unmeasured by paperwork. To those who know it, it is not wilderness. It is a question that answers itself slowly, and only after you stop asking. The team was small, 5 men. One goal: chart the mineral composition of the eastern ridges near Ram Plateau, a flat, lonely slab of land that locals called the rooftop. From there, they would descend into the glacier-fed valleys and collect samples. The team leader, Darrell Wolfe, was known for his sharp mind and sharper tongue. A field engineer in his 30s, Wolfe had spent time in the Rockies and approached the Nahanni like an equation. Hell, he reportedly told a ranger at his departure, "I've dealt with worse weather in Banff. This is just rock and slope." He packed chart paper, a geological hammer, and a brand new shortwave radio. He did not pack a map assembled by the Nadi, the Dene traditional custodians of the valley. The rangers gave him one anyway. He folded it without reading. The team was dropped by floatplane near Glacier Lake on June 3, 1962. The next point of contact was scheduled for the 10th, a simple scheduled radio check-in. It came 2 days late, and it didn't come from Wolfe. The voice on the other end was distant. Not static, exactly, just empty. Breathless. 2 words, spoken twice. Still here, still here. The signal dropped after 1 minute. Attempts to re-establish contact failed for 3 days. On the 4th, Wolfe's voice returned, clipped and distorted. Hold extraction. Weather. Repeat. Hold. The skies were clear. The weather had been clear for a week. Resupply by air was postponed, but rumors started to circulate in Fort Simpson. One of the old bush pilots, a man who flew these routes long before it was sanctioned, said his brother had worked a line near Ram Plateau once. "Didn't like the way trees leaned," he said. "Didn't like the way sound came back either. Your own voice came back late. Said your name after you did." Resupply finally arrived on June 17th. The floatplanes circled the camp twice before attempting to land. From the air, at first, everything seemed untouched. 3 tents, stacked gear, collection crates positioned near a pine lean-to. But no figures moved. No fires. No flags. The landing was uneventful. Approach? Not the same. The pilot, Don Fisher, stepped cautiously into camp with his co-pilot trailing behind. The first tent held clothing laid neatly on folded bedding. The second, field bags and open food packets, undisturbed. No signs of conflict. No signs of packing to flee. In the third tent, they found Wolfe's notebook. Its first dozen pages mirrored the pattern of fieldwork, elevation notes, tree species, rock samples, temperature change. Around June 9th, the entries changed. Fog settled twice on summit. Returned in late morning. Unnatural direction. Harper missing from morning roll call. We found his compass twisted backward. Returned by nightfall. No memory of where he'd gone. Trees seemed straighter than usual. Odd to say, but they seem watching. On June 11th, radio malfunction, picking up 3 tones. Repeating, always in 3s. No voice behind them. On June 13th, sound returned last night. Not mechanical. Counting. In the fog? Harper stopped sleeping. Sammy won't talk. I don't think it wants us gone. I think it's just learning us. The final entry had no date. Just a single line scratched repeatedly into the paper, so hard the pen nearly tore through. Something is still here. 2 of the crew members were never found. No prints in the soil. No drag marks. No bodies. The others, Wolf included, were silent upon evacuation, medically stable, but refusing to give statements. The one word most often used in initial debriefs? Wrong. Something felt wrong. The wrong place. The sounds showed up in the wrong parts of the day. Only later did Wolf agree to a single off-the-record interview. In it, he described the fog, not as weather, but as something closer to awareness. A presence. It didn't move like mist, he said. It moved like it already knew where I'd go. And it took something when it passed through. He never returned to field work. Moved south. Taught at a small rural college until he passed away, decades later. Among his belongings, found in a sealed wooden box, were 3 artifacts: a stone with what appeared to be tool markings, unidentified origin, a torn page from his field book, retouched by hand, a tape marked in pencil, tones, Ram Plateau, June 62. No audio has yet been publicly released. Decades later, satellite footage over that region showed anomalies near the spot the crew had camped. Subtle shifts in canopy, rock slides that left no debris, a spiral-shaped indentation near a shelf above timberline. It was gone by the next month. The Nahanni doesn't strike. It doesn't scream. But when it sees that someone isn't listening, that they walk like they already know the map, it watches. And then, slowly, it begins unmaking the map. Most visitors are not taken. But those who are, they tend to be like Wolf's team, not fools, not reckless, but confident, assuming patterns only flow one way. The valley doesn't forgive that, because the valley is the pattern. Ask any elder. They'll tell you the same thing that File once whispered. The land doesn't warn. It just repeats. 3 times. After that, it collects. The crew lost in 1962 weren't warned. They were measured, observed, and when the final note was out of key, a voice missing, a name repeated through the trees, the land footnoted them into silence. And as planes circled overhead looking for them, the valley waited. Stone by stone, tone by tone, step by step. 1, 2, 3. By the late 1970s, the Nahanni Valley had changed. Not in the way maps record. The terrain remained the same. The river still carved its old spiral beneath the cliffs, but in the language people used. It was no longer whispered about as a gold road or a frontier. Now, on the lodge walls and ranger logs, it was called something else, a place that forgets to let you go. Tourists came in from the south, some outfitted in brushed aluminum canoes, others flown upriver by bush pilots who rarely crossed the fog line. They brought radios, cameras, compasses, confident the old legends were just that, traps for the mind, not the body. But the fog had not forgotten. It still slid over the water in sheets, even under clear skies. It still settled too low in the valleys. And always, after the fog, someone would go quiet. First, their stories slowed. Then their footsteps. Then, eventually, their direction. Eliza Harrow was a Parks Canada ranger in her 3rd season at Nahanni. Young, precise, methodical. She kept her logs clean, handwriting neat, everything in its place. She was assigned a northern route in 1978, tasked with inter-checkpoint visits along the eastern half of Ram Plateau and Glacier Lake. On the 14th of August, at 17:42 p.m., she made her last scheduled radio check-in. 6 words, all carefully enunciated. Cairn moved. Counting again. Packing now. She was never heard from again. Search parties followed. Hikers spread out. Bush planes circled the lake's edge and inland slopes. No sign of her tracks or gear. But near First Canyon, under a slight overhang in a stand where bird calls abruptly ceased, they found something unusual. 3 cairns. Deliberate in their build. Flat stones. each stacked between 6 and 8 layers high, but with no sign of who placed them. The ground around them was cleared of pine needles, as though swept, even though no branch lines or boot trails led in or out. One searcher claimed the tallest cairn bore an opening on the side, a hollow circle, like a mouth. Another refused to go near it at all. Felt like it had a list, he would later say. After 3 days of combing the area, the team called off the search. No birds sang the morning they left. Narrator, Vio, by then, the valley no longer had to prove anything. The pattern had moved past coincidence. Some said, people just vanish when they're careless. But careful people vanished just the same. And when they did, the fog made sure no trace stayed long. In the spring of 1979, a group of fishermen from Yellowknife paddled along First Canyon. They were weekend men, no stories in their backpacks, just beer and lures. On the 4th day, they spotted a small red tent perched high above the waterline on a flat rock shelf. One man offered to climb up, but the trail was nothing but loose scree and dried moss. It didn't look recently disturbed. From below, they saw no movement, just red fabric flapping slowly, purposelessly. They camped on the bend below it, planning to paddle back at sunrise. At dawn, the ledge was empty. The tent was gone. In its place was a spiral drawn in white river stones, each the size of a closed hand. There were no stones like it anywhere nearby. They paddled faster the next day. But for nearly half the journey back, they kept circling the same stretch of river. Compass said west. River said still. Only when one man, a Cree paddler with old songs in his throat, whispered a Dene word his grandfather had taught him, Wabcha, I am not here, did the current change. He said it again. The bow dipped forward, and the boat moved. They never paddled that river again. Fog doesn't hide in the Nahanni. It fetches, and when it moves low, slow, without color, it's not there to confuse you. It's there to make sure whatever is near can arrive quietly. There's a shoreline south of Headless Valley shaped like a knife. Locals call it Whisper Turn. More than a dozen times since the 1940s, camps have been reported there 1 week, vanished the next. Stove still hot, logs still upright, loops of twine left hanging from trees, undisturbed by wind. But no names remain attached to these disappearances, because in every case, the paperwork stopped partway through. Field logs misplaced, names redacted, maps smeared with water without a source. In one rare report, a backcountry trekker, an unofficial hiker, no permits, managed to walk out after disappearing for 4 days. He claimed he'd only been gone 1. When asked what he remembered, the man replied, a night with no wind at all. Fog so thick it roared. And counting. Not mine. He no longer camps. Anywhere. By the 1980s, even rangers gave up on full patrols in certain areas. They drew silent corridors, invisible boundaries between safe terrain and land that remembers. If it looked familiar too long, if it smelled right too far from camp, you left. Because the Nahanni doesn't take you with violence. It brings you to a stop, in the same place, again and again, until your story no longer moves forward. And then, it files you away. Quietly. Completely. It's no longer uncommon to hear of cairns moving. Hot springs that shift temperature. Tents found zipped shut from the inside, but empty. And once, just once, a ranger reported a map folded on a cabin table that began with their district, but ended with nothing but spirals. The Nahanni doesn't want revenge. It doesn't hunger. It remembers. And when enough memories are placed in line, the fog rolls in, reshaping what little we know. Even now, hikers returning from the valley sometimes dream of stones clicking together, or footsteps behind them that stop when they turn. 1, 2, 3. A soft, rhythmic breath, felt rather than heard. A story trying to count itself forward, but finding too many pages missing. The valley doesn't chase you, but it will wait. And when the fog is thick enough, and the trail loops back, you may find the stone spiral again, even if you've broken camp. Even if no stone was ever there when you arrived. And in that moment, you'll understand. You are now part of the pattern. Long before the Nahanni was carved into trapper maps, long before gold-hungry men set their eyes upon the river's turns, there was a silence already walking the valley. It wore no face, left no signature, and those who lived nearby knew enough not to disturb it. They say stories don't start in the Nahanni. They end there. Indigenous oral history, older than any border, older than written language, speaks of a people known now only by one name, the Naha. They weren't ghosts. They weren't giants or monsters. They were human, according to the stories, but not like us anymore. The Naha are described as tall, silent, and without permanent homes. Mountain people, stone-footed, moving at night through high passes and circling game trails others feared to walk. Then, one day, without blood, without battle, they vanished. In many versions of the story, the Naha didn't die. They were called back. A reckoning, a shifting of the land's patience. One Dene elder, when asked in the 1980s why certain valleys remained off-limits, answered with quiet finality. Because even the ones who lived there weren't safe from the place. It remembered their steps too many times. That's why it turned them inside. It's not a disappearance, she said. It's an unmaking. Like an unfinished song the earth chose to mute. There is one story, rarely told, of a young woman separated from her hunting group during spring thaw. She wandered alone into one of the upper canyons, past the third bend, toward the red cliffs that catch morning light like flame. That night, as fog came without wind, she heard someone counting, not in English, not in any spoken Dene dialect, but in a rhythm she felt just under her skin. 3 breaths, 3 syllables, 3 tones. The next morning, she returned to camp, alive, silent, wrapped in her coat, with new stitching braided into her sleeves, tight spiral patterns made from spruce thread. She never spoke again. She never looked behind her. The elders burned her moccasins, buried her shadow with stone, and moved camp 2 valleys south. What makes the Nahanni feel sacred or cursed is not the number of stories, but the quiet between them. The things no one dares describe directly. The fragment, not the whole. The detail, not the explanation. When the land holds memory longer than a generation, it stops answering questions. And folklore is all we have left when the land refuses to explain. For the Dene, cairns are not decoration. They mark places of significance. Burials, yes, but also warnings. Each stone carries purpose, chosen, not random. And in Nahanni, the cairns that move are not accidents. They're messages, a pattern recorded by the land itself. Some guides say the spiral is a counting system. Others say it's not meant for us to decode. It's for them. Not the Naha people, but what took them. A guide named Thomas Liard once told a chilling story in late September, too late in the season for drifting campfire tales. He said his grandfather, a respected tracker, had found a line of stones deep in uncut territory, stacked cairns, spaced precisely 7 paces apart. The track ended at the edge of an overhang. No trail beyond it. No drop either. Just blank stone. Unmarked. Unyielding. But the final cairn was different. It bore 7 coins, rusted, misshapen, placed in a ring. No one in the hunting party carried coins. None would touch them. Not one of them returned to that spot again. To outsiders, that story is unexplained wildlife. Unstable memories. But to those who live near the Nahanni, there's no confusion. If a path circles back, you don't walk it again. If voices echo with no speaker, you don't answer. And if you count 3 cairns where there should be 2, you leave something behind. A scarf, a tool, a breath you won't reclaim, something to show you understood. You see, the Naha weren't erased. They met their counting. And the valley, heavy with footsteps and unsung names, absorbed them. You can still feel it near the 3rd canyon, if you stand alone at dusk. No birds, no wind. Only one soft pressure across the back of your neck, like a breath not your own. Some say there are places where time slows, not metaphorically, but in the way water moves in negatives, falling without splash. In these places, people feel distance collapse. They remember footsteps they didn't take. They find camps they didn't build. They walk in spirals, endlessly returning to the same flat stone with different moss. What comes for them isn't something that follows. It's something that meets them halfway. The most peculiar part? There have been no confirmed sightings of the Naha people. Not since the early 1800s. No recorded settlement. No bones recovered. Just stories. And cairns no one claims. Placed where no person should reach. Reset overnight. Marked with spirals. And always, one stone left unstacked. Waiting. In some traditions, when someone passes and the cause is unclear, no war, no hunger, no wound. The death is not named. It is counted. It is indexed by silence. The valley didn't chase the Naha out. It remembered them. Too many steps over too long. And when a place remembers, eventually, it calls everything home. So when hikers vanish, and their camps are found warm and untouched, or surveyors walk out with half a map and nothing to say, you'll sometimes find a small cairn, maybe accidental, maybe not, alongside one final marker, a stone placed off the path. Not part of the stack, not in the ring, just watching. The spirits of the Naha don't whisper. They don't scream. They rearrange. And then they wait. Not for vengeance, for balance. Today, the Nahanni looks pristine. A glacial jewel ringed in alpine grass, thunderous waterfalls, and rock walls older than human time. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site. A protected expanse twice the size of Yellowstone, cut by a river whose name carries silence. On brochures, it is wild, beautiful, untamed. But to those who've walked its valleys, or those who've turned back just in time, it is something deeper. It is patient, and it is waiting. By the 2000s, legends of the Headless Valley had started to fade, dismissed as frontier fiction, stories told in haunted tones by old men in trappers' cabins. But even as the stories grew quieter, the land did not. Guides began reporting cairns in places with no approach. Tourists found stone spirals arranged silently behind their camps, even when they'd arrived alone. Drone pilots saw movements in topography just days apart. Risen mounds, flattened clearings, adjusted soil patterns. Then gone. In 2022, a drone team from the University of Alberta was contracted to survey tree regrowth on the slopes near Glacier Lake, a neutral task. The plan was to gather thermal data. Fly in, fly out. On the fifth flight, the drone picked up 17 pale spirals arranged across an alpine shelf. Nearly perfect in symmetry, almost too precise. Each spiral was composed of stone, plant ash, and soil discoloration. No footprints let in. No trails were visible. From above, they resembled an ancient calendar, or a kind of clock. By the end of the shift, fog rolled in. The spirals faded beneath it. By morning, they were gone. The researchers marked the footage, saved the coordinates. But when they returned a week later, the shelf contained nothing but lichen. No depressions, no leaf scatter, no memory. The wind didn't answer, and the birds flew wide around the site. The team logged it and moved on. But the footage remained, 17 spirals, imperfect, incomplete, paused mid-sequence, as though still waiting for the next part of the pattern to be placed. And just like that, even the skeptics began to admit, maybe the Nahanni doesn't need to be believed, because it doesn't care if you believe. Over time, people stopped asking what the Nahanni is. They started asking, what does it want? One theory, never officially published, suggests the Nahanni Valley operates on what researchers called a memory rhythm, not a cause of disappearances, but a response to intrusion, a kind of cyclical awareness, not a punishment, not a haunting, but a pattern of balancing memory and forgetting, an ecology of silence. That same paper noted a curious record from 1941. 3 hikers lost for 48 hours, who, upon being found, could not recall their own names until reaching the treeline. They had walked fully clothed, with food in their packs and water untouched. Yet they remembered nothing but fog, and that they had heard something being arranged. The word arranged appears 3 times in the final report before it was archived and forgotten. Those who believe in patterns, real or imagined, notice something else. Many disappearances involve some form of disruption. Whistling in forbidden places, moving a cairn, unpacking equipment on sacred ground, marking stone with fresh chalk, naming things that were already named. In each case, soon after came the silence, then the fog, then the absence. There is a rhythm here, an older Dene guide said quietly after turning down an expedition job in 2006. It plays whether you listen or not. But if you listen wrong, it will turn you into one of its verses. There are crags in the Nahanni that should not echo, but do, and some that seem like natural amphitheaters, but carry no sound. Sometimes paths loop, sometimes maps lose their scale, and when that happens, no signal carries. Not satellite, not voice, not hope. The mountain waits. It does not guard. It does not judge. It simply studies. It studies how men walk, where they choose to stop, what they count, and when they forget what cannot be disturbed. Some believe the Nahanni has a threshold, not a visible gate, but a point beyond which things begin to notice. Leave your fire burning past midnight. Call out too many times with no answer. Dig where the moss grows thicker than the soil beneath it. They don't say what happens exactly, only that your own footsteps might begin to sound unfamiliar, heavier, out of sync, as if something is longer in stride than you. And closer. People vanish here not in chaos, but in sequence. 3 tones, 3 warnings, 3 still moments, and then stillness. A climber named Felix, in 2015, went alone through Lower Ram Canyon. He texted friends daily, uploaded videos, geotagged sunsets. On day 7, he uploaded a video titled High Echo Test. It is the last known contact. In the minute-long clip, he yells once into the canyon, "Hello." Silence. Then, 3 sharp tones, like stone knocked softly against stone. Then a breath behind the microphone. Then the clip ends. All devices were later found in his last known camp. He was not. His last note, written on a page torn from a field journal, read, "None of this feels lost. It feels catalogued." That word appears again and again. Not taken, not attacked, but catalogued, like a library, where names weaken over time until replaced. Where your presence was an item that didn't fit where you placed it. So it was moved, not maliciously, efficiently. No one remembers how many cairns line 3rd Canyon now. They are not kept in official data, but hikers tell of seeing different numbers each time. Only one rule is shared quietly on laminated field cards issued to guides. Never remove a cairn. Never count them out loud. And if you complete a spiral, don't look back. Because the mountain may not be a place. It may be a sleep, an archive, a slow understanding of time. And when you hand it your footsteps, it adds them to the queue just the same. The Nahanni is not building toward violence. It is building toward understanding. And when it finally arranges the last cairn, the last spiral, the final name in stillness, then perhaps it will stop waiting. Until then, 1, 2, 3. The Nahanni does not remember names. Not in the way we do, carved on plaques or etched into stone. It remembers steps, decisions, the weight of a boot placed on the wrong path. The voice raised when silence was asked for. The moment a hand reached for something it was not meant to touch. And so the Nahanni rarely returns what it's taken, because it doesn't take. It absorbs. Over 100 years of stories. More than 40 documented disappearances. Gold rush wanderers, prospectors, trappers, hikers, biologists, rangers. Official records only speak what they can prove. Most read, cause unknown, body unrecovered, foul play not suspected. But what's striking isn't just how little the records explain, it's how little they try. The valley does not explain itself, and so neither do the files. Camp found, food packed, fire still warm, gone. A loop without a last page. The McLeod brothers, Martin Jorgensen, Eliza Harrow, 2 unnamed members of the 1962 expedition, the climber, Felix, and dozens more who left no journal, no final message, not even a trace of motion in the dirt. Their stories aren't forgotten. They're unfinished. And that may be the valley's subtle invitation, not to end the story, but to become its spacing, to be folded into it, to be filed carefully, deliberately, until you are no longer missing, only categorized. In some cultures, the worst fate is not death. It is being misplaced. Unmarked graves, unnamed ancestors, unfinished songs. What is grief without direction? What is a legacy that loops indefinitely? These are the questions you can feel in parts of the Nahanni, in spots where the stones lean unnaturally inward, where fog lingers longer than predicted, and voices come back not echoing, but mirrored, as though checking to see if you've learned the words correctly. An elder once said, "We don't get lost in the Nahanni. We get returned to the wrong shelf." That's what the valley keeps. Not heads, not bones, but paths that no longer lead out. In the years since the Nahanni was declared a national park and protected cultural site, the incidents have slowed, or perhaps simply changed shape. People pass through on shorter tours now. Guides carry GPS beacons. Float planes check in and out with precision. But the stories haven't stopped. They've just adjusted to fit into cell reception and digital silence. Flickering devices, compasses that spin at noon, a drone that returns with too much data, too many stone piles where there should be none. Some call it imagination, others call it pattern recognition. But the guides, the real ones, still follow old rules. Don't whistle after dusk. Don't build your fire too close to an old cairn. Leave the spiral unfinished. And never camp where no birds sing. Because in those places, the Nahanni is listening, not to you, but to the gaps in your knowledge, to the silence between your steps, to the way you fail to notice that the stones underfoot are no longer random, that you've stepped into something curated, archived. This valley is not haunted. Hauntings are loud, emotional. The Nahanni is quiet. It waits for alignment. Step out of order. Speak when you should have held your breath. Count wrong, and it may straighten your error by removing you from the page completely. The Dene don't speak of the valley in past tense. They speak of it with presence, with ritual. They gift the land something before entering. A stone, a song, a piece of breath. So that, should they not return, the story does. Because that is what the Nahanni keeps most of all, not the dead, but the unfinished, the unsaid, the still waiting. Across Headless Valley, there are places where stones appear stacked without precedent, triangles, spirals, nested rings, miles apart, yet rhythmically spaced. An engineer once charted them and concluded they were unlikely to be accidental. No one has moved them since. They are not waypoints. They are words in a language we're not supposed to read aloud. There's a theory among quiet researchers and even quieter spiritualists that the Nahanni waits, not just to absorb, but to complete itself. That each person who vanishes there is not a loss. They're an addition. One more verse in the land's buried scripture. One more syllable in a story older than human sound. And when you reach the heart of it, past the third canyon, past the counting cairns, past the place where echo no longer returns, you might hear something. Not a voice, not a warning, just the shapes of sound arranging themselves again. 1, 2, 3, like a thought not your own, repeating itself until it fits. So what does the Nahanni keep? Not evidence, not proof, but stillness, measured in rhythms older than maps, older than books, older than even the first missing person. If you ever go far enough upriver, hear nothing, and start counting your own footsteps, be careful. The moment the footsteps count with you, you've already been remembered, and the valley never forgets one of its own. Fade to silence. No music, just wind and distant water. Then, faintly, a stone clicks softly into place. If that gave you chills, like the video, share it with someone who sleeps with the lights off, and hit subscribe, or the next photo might have you in it. Tap the bell. The next story drops soon.